Check, check, check. Audio test 1 for the meeting stream. Audio test 2 for the meeting stream.
Good morning.
Yeah. No, King Ed is worse, but.
Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in 1 minute. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting of June 11th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the city of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, residents can still make written submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I've received regrets from member Dote. Before we proceed, I'll ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Member Dote, Member Quinn.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Madigan.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Member Legault.
Present.
Vice Chair Plount.
Ayo.
Chair King.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of Tuesday, May 14th, 2024 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. As we go through the consent agenda this morning, the first item, considerations of objections to the notice of intention to designate 119 Bradford Street and 73 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act will be held as we have speakers registered. The next item, the designation of 94 Beechwood Avenue, 241 Marriott Avenue, as well as 275 St. Laurent Boulevard, does not have a registered speaker except for Heritage Ottawa. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa as well. I just wanted to ask Heritage Ottawa, would they need to speak if this item was carried by committee? Thank you so much. Are there any questions on this item? Questions to staff by committee? Seeing none, is this report carried? Carried, thank you. So that specific report will be submitted to City Council on June 25th for consideration. The next item involves multiple properties on Rideau Street. It will be held as there are registered speakers. We will also hold the last substantive item on Bill 23, implementation concerning heritage conservation districts, as there are registered speakers. So we will go back to our first item, which is the consideration of objections to the notice of intention to designate 119 Bradford Street and 73 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we do have a presentation from staff. And we're just working on the presentation in the room. So we will begin shortly once the presentation is set up.
Okay, it sounds like we're ready to go.
Excellent.
So good
Thank you.
morning, Chair and members of the committee. This first report before you today is in response to two objections that were received to the notices of intention to designate that were issued by City Council. These were for 119 Bradford Street and 73 Rideau Street. Both these properties were considered by the committee in April as part of two separate grouping reports, one for Britannia Village and the other two for a property on Rideau Street. Today's presentation will be provided by myself and my colleague Mackenzie Kim, as we each worked on one of the two designations. Next slide, please. The property at 119 Bradford Street, also known as The Pines, is located in the western suburb of Britannia Village on the east side of the street between Rowett and Jameson Streets. The property contains a two-story front gable house representative of the early character of Britannia as a late 19th century and early 20th century summer resort. Next slide, please. 73 Rideau Street is located on the north side of Rideau, just east of Sussex Drive and west of the pedestrian link connecting to the Rideau Centre. The property is made up of a 6-story section, historically known as the Stewart Building, and a 5-story section unified by the stone facade. The building was constructed in phases between 1926 and 1929 as the A.J. Freeman Department Store, also known as Freeman's. Next slide. On the screen is an abbreviated graphic illustrating the designation process under Part 4. Under the current Ontario Heritage Act, there are 2 opportunities to challenge a designation. Today, we're working with the first opportunity, referred to in the Ontario Heritage Act as an objection. The Act requires that Council consider the objection and decide from 2 options. The first being to proceed with the designation, or secondly, to withdraw the designation. This stage is highlighted on screen. Council has 90 days following the conclusion of an objection period to decide on the objection, bringing us to a statutory end date of August 17th, 2024. The Built Heritage Subcommittee's role today is to pick one of 2 options and recommend that to Council either withdraw the notices of intention to designate or proceed with the notices of intention to designate as per staff's recommendation. If Council decides to withdraw the notice of intention to designate, it's effectively cancelled and will not proceed further. The City is also required to issue a notice of withdrawal similar to the original notice of intention to designate. If Council decides to proceed with the process, the process continues normally. It is important to note that if Council proceeds with the designation, the approval of the designation bylaw is open to appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Next slide. In terms of timelines, the recommendation for designation was carried at the April BHC and Council meetings. In mid-May, notices of intention to designate were received. Notices of objection were received. Committee is considering this item at committee today. It will be going to Council on June 25th. The timeline for consideration of the objections will expire August 17th. Next slide. A property may be designated under the Ontario Heritage Act if it meets 2 or more of the 9 criteria set out in Regulation 0906. Through research and evaluation, staff have determined that 119 Bradford Street meets 4 of the 9 criteria. It is a front-gabled, 2-story vernacular-style residence constructed circa 1904 in Britannia. Its first owners, Bessie and Edmund Ebenezer Stockton, were prominent members of the Britannia Yacht Club, especially during its formative years. The house was built during Britannia's peak as a summer resort from 1900 to 1914. And this building exemplifies Britannia's vernacular style cottage style and contributes to the character of Britannia as a summer resort at the turn of the century. Next slide. Staff received a letter from the owner on May 14th objecting to Council's notice of intention to designate. The letter outlined 2 main reasons. Firstly, the potential impact designation may have on the property value as well as maintenance costs. And secondly, the condition of the property. Next slide. While financial aspects of designation are not a consideration in evaluating a property for designation, the City of Ottawa offers a heritage grant for building restoration to assist property owners with costs related to restoration of designated properties. Small-scale properties such as 119 Bradford would qualify for a matching grant up to $10,000. Newly designated properties are of the highest priority for funding as per the program guidelines. In instances where the maintenance of heritage attributes of a property become a financial challenge for a property owner, staff work with the owners towards creative solutions to conserve the heritage value and attributes of designated properties while working within the property owner's means. Next slide. And secondly, in response to the condition of a property is not a consideration when evaluating a property for designation under Ontario Regulation 0906. Upon staff review and evaluation, many of the original features are still present and could be conserved, or those that have been altered could be restored. Many of the issues noted in the letter are typical of buildings of this age and type. Next slide. I'll pass it over to Mackenzie to look at Rideau Street.
Thanks, Ashley. So for 73 Rideau Street, through staff's research and evaluation, it was determined that the property meets 5 out of 9 criteria. The building was constructed in phases between 1926 and 1929 as the Freeman's Department Store, a well-known retail institution in Ottawa, and was one of the earliest businesses on Rideau Street. The building was designed by John A. Ewart in the Beaux-Arts style, and the building is also associated with the Freeman family, known for their innovative business strategies and who were integral members of the Jewish community in Ottawa, Canada, and internationally. The building is also historically and functionally linked to its surroundings, contributing to the commercial character of Rideau Street since the 19th century. Next slide, please. So staff received a letter from the owner on May 21st, objecting to council's notice of intention to designate. The letter outlined a number of main reasons for the objection, and they've been summarized on the slide. The first being financial considerations, so the impact the designation will have on property value, redevelopment costs, maintenance costs, also the condition of the property and its elements, as well as potential impacts to future tenants or challenges with leasing, and also potential impacts to marketability in the event of the sale of the property. So if we go to the next slide, as Ashley mentioned, although financial impacts of designation are not a consideration in evaluating a property for designation, the City of Ottawa does offer 2 financial incentive programs to help offset some of those costs related to restoration. We've mentioned the Heritage Grant Program, but in the case of 73 Rideau Street, this property would qualify for the larger scale category. So that could provide a matching grant of up to $25,000 for restoration work. The city also provides a community improvement program for heritage properties that seeks to encourage adaptive reuse as part of a redevelopment. And so this property could be eligible for that program as well, which offers up to $500,000 in the form of a tax increment equivalent grant. So should the current or future owner have development plans, staff see many opportunities to find creative solutions to conserve the cultural heritage value and attributes of a property like this, while also achieving other city building goals such as additional housing and providing more density. If we go to the next slide, the second reason for objection outlined in the letter relates to the condition of the property and its elements having been removed or eroded, such as the windows and some of its details. As Ashley mentioned, condition is not a factor in evaluating for designation, and staff have determined that many of the building's original features are present and in a condition that is typical for a building of this age and type. And although some of the elements have been altered, they could be restored. If we go to the next slide, the third reason for objection specifically relates to challenges for future tenants and the large display windows on the first story. So staff are of the opinion that the display windows on the ground floor are an integral component that expresses the building's cultural heritage value as an early department store, and staff are of the opinion that they are appropriately included in the list of attributes. However, staff do work very closely with owners and tenants through the heritage permit process to find creative solutions that conserve those particular attributes, but also meet a tenant's design or function requirements. So for example, for branding, signage, or privacy, and staff are confident that we could get there through that permit process. And then lastly, if we go to the next slide, the letter outlines concerns related to potential marketability of the property in the event of a sale. So 73 Rideau Street, as you can see on the screen, the rear of the property forms part of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District, with the boundary that runs essentially through the block. And also, it's not on the screen, but the building at 73 Rideau is connected to the first 2 properties on the on the east side of the pedestrian link, and those are also already designated under Part 4. So any changes to this property would already be subject to a heritage permit process. And this Part 4 designation for the portion facing Rideau Street would, in staff's opinion, unify the designation status and clarify permitting requirements for any potential new owner and clarify the elements for conservation were there to be a redevelopment in the future. If we go to the last slide here, just to wrap up, in conclusion, staff have re-examined the reasons for designation for both 119 Bradford and 73 Rideau Street in light of the objections received and remain of the opinion that the subject property's cultural heritage value meet the required criteria prescribed in Regulation 0906 and that those values are appropriately represented in the statements of cultural heritage value. And therefore, staff recommend that council not withdraw the notices of intention to designate for these properties and proceed with the designation process under the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you for that in-depth presentation. It's much appreciated. We did receive correspondence on this file from Heritage Ottawa, and we do have a number of registered speakers. So I've noted the hands that have been raised. I'm assuming that's for questions for staff. First, we will go to our registered speakers, and the first speaker is Janet Durno. Thank you for joining us this morning, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to express my reasons for objecting to the designation of my house, 119 Bradford Street. I do value the heritage nature of Britannia Village, and for many years I've maintained my old house at a considerable cost, but I'm very concerned about the proposal to designate it as a heritage property, and that I thus submitted a notice of objection. The house is becoming increasingly fragile. It was built as a cottage with little storage space, no basement or proper foundation, walls which have little or no insulation, and a very low crawl space, which is integral to the overall structure and health of the house and the heritage elements. This crawl space often has to be entered for repairs to electrical and plumbing systems, as well as to the crawl space itself. This requires people to do the work lying down in a low cramped space, wearing protective gear. And as a result, it's very difficult to find people who will do the work. And of course, the cost is considerable when I do find someone. Despite preventative measures, rodent entry and damage has been increasing over the years. I won't go into all the examples, but the electrical system has been shorted out, which is extremely expensive to repair. There's a risk of fire, of course, when things are chewing on the wires. Also, there's annual issues with wet and moldy insulation from leaks in the attic, again, in spite of preventative measures, moldy insulation in the crawl space. The fireplace itself has been deemed unsafe and has been unusable for many years, although the chimney is one of the designated elements, I understand. As time goes by, I'm more concerned that more issues could arise, which could eventually render the house unsafe to live in, or at least make it more prohibitively costly to maintain. While the lot is large, the house itself is small, adequate for only 1 or 2 people to live in. If the house becomes a designated heritage property with all the restrictions that carries with it, I expect that this, combined with the small size, age, and deteriorating condition of the house, and the high ongoing maintenance costs, would significantly reduce the number of interested buyers and decrease the resale value of my property. If so, this will have a negative impact on my own future financial security. As a senior, I've been counting on obtaining a good price for my property, the house, not the land, rather than the house, I would say. When I finally have to sell, this would help to cover future costs of living. For example, if I eventually have to move into an expensive retirement home. I realize that the city has to balance many priorities and that the heritage of the city is one of these priorities. However, especially in a time of a housing emergency, I do question the priority of preserving a small aging cottage that can house at most a couple of people, rather than keeping the option open for this large lot to eventually support one or two new houses that would be large enough actually for whole families to live in. I therefore submitted my notice of objection and request that my house not be designated as a heritage property. Thank you for listening and for considering my request.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there any questions for this delegate? Seeing none, thank you so much for your submission this morning.
Thank you.
We also have David Fleming, registered from Heritage Ottawa. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are pleased to support the staff recommendation to not withdraw the notice of intention to designate 73 Rideau Street. We strongly support the designation of both properties in our submission to the April 9th Built Heritage Committee meeting, and we're pleased that Council subsequently approved the recommendations. As the staff report notes, quote, financial implications and impacts on property value are not a consideration in evaluating a property for designation under Ontario Regulation 906, unquote. Likewise, the condition of a property is usually not considered in such evaluations. The City of Ottawa's Heritage Grant Program for Building Restoration and the Community Improvement Plan provide property owners with an opportunity to preserve and develop their properties subject to the heritage attributes protected by the designation bylaw. The Heritage Community Improvement Plan provides up to $500,000 in tax increment equivalent grants for up to 10 years. We are especially disappointed by the position of the Hudson's Bay Company to oppose the designation. The Hudson's Bay Company is the oldest company in North America and has for over 350 years demonstrated a strong commitment to the preservation and documentation of our nation's rich and varied history. The company currently owns late 19th and 20th century heritage properties in Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. And in fact, in the Vancouver, and all these have municipal heritage protection. The Vancouver building is currently undergoing an addition of a 12-story residential component. Likewise, the former Freemium department store is a unique representation of Ottawa's commercial and social history, and the last of the 4 large 20th century department stores along what was the city's main commercial street. Its protection under the Ontario Heritage Act offers an opportunity to preserve this disappearing vestige of our history and the role of the Freeman family in community development. Besides being a businessman, AJ was an avid supporter of the arts and culture, and Lillian Freeman helped establish the Poppy program to support World War I veterans. The HBC letter specifically references the large display windows on the first story. We would argue that besides the building's architectural importance, this is one of the most significant attributes of a 20th century department store. Window displays and window shopping were a store's link with potential shoppers that also contain displays and promotions relating to seasonal events, such as the unique A.J. Freeman Santa Claus train, which operated from 1956 to 1972. Finally, we do agree with the HBC that the City of Ottawa's matching heritage grant for building restoration program should be increased quote, to an amount substantially higher than the current $25,000. We therefore welcome their support for what has been an ongoing advocacy issue for Heritage Ottawa over the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your submission. Are there any questions for Mr. Fleming? Yes, Councillor Lieber.
Thanks. David, obviously your comments are focused on the bay, but I am, my heartstrings are being tugged by the Bradford property. Do you have any input on that today since you're here?
Well, this is a difficult one. While we understand what the regulations are, we feel that in this particular instance, it does put a pressure on the owner, and we've decided just not to take a position on it.
Very political of you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Vice Chair Blount.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is the Brantford property, is there social disorder issues around there, or it's just exclusively related to the condition of the property?
According to the property owner, it's mainly related to condition and costs.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, thank you so much for your delegation. Now, questions to staff. Member Legault.
Yes, I have two questions related to both properties, I guess. In your presentation, you reference the creative solutions that you're able to provide for both the Bradford property and Rideau Street. I think it's a bit more clear to me what sort of creative solutions would be possible for Rideau Street, but for Bradford Street, given that it's a large property, is severing the property a possibility? Yeah, could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, severance would be subject to a committee of adjustment process. There is another property that's designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act in Britannia that was recently severed, and there's an application for a new house to be built on that. So I would assume it would follow a similar process that we would look to see whether it impact the subject property, any new construction, and go through a committee of adjustment process for the severance.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, maybe if I can just add one thing to that. I think another aspect of sort of the creative solution piece that we refer to in the report for Bradford in particular is around kind of the maintenance of heritage attributes and the options available to property owners should certain attributes become unrepairable or that sort of thing. We try to take a certain amount of flexibility despite the standards and guidelines around materials and types of, for instance, windows. If we were to use windows as a generic example, perhaps they could use an alternative material on rear windows or side windows, and we would look for wood at the front, that kind of thing. Right.
I'm not speaking specifically about Bradford, just a general comment on materials and how we try to work within an owner's desires and also their budget. I think that's a real reality that we have to deal with when we're dealing with private property owners, is that not everybody has deep pockets to maintain these heritage buildings. So we have the grant program, and then I think we also try to be flexible and work with the property owner to kind of meet their goals and needs for their home.
Okay. Yeah, especially with like a wood frame construction that's a cottage style, that's especially challenging. Is the foundation, do we know offhand, or I would assume it's in the report what the foundation is constructed of?
I'm not certain, sorry.
Oh, I think the property owner, I'm not sure if she can respond, but anyways, I would just be curious to know in terms of that creative solution side. My second question is related to the grant funding available. So from what I understand, there's the $25,000 grant, but then I think Mackenzie, you referenced a possibility of a $500,000. Can you elaborate on that grant?
I can start, and then maybe Ashley, you can jump in. She's more familiar with the program, but so The community improvement program that the city has is set up specifically for designated properties, and it's to encourage adaptive reuse with a high standard of heritage restoration component. And so it does work through the taxes, so a tax increment equivalent grant, and it's over a period of up to 10 years. Maybe you can actually want to jump in.
I'll just add to that for these projects, we expect some development and new housing units to be included. So it is intended for large scale projects, typically downtown commercial areas, and under the assumption that the property taxes would go up on the property. And therefore, the city is providing sort of like a grant and returning those taxes, the money you've spent on the conservation and restoration of the building while adding density on the property.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I just have a comment about like $25,000 is maybe like a budget you would have for a residential like kitchen renovation. It's not really an appropriate budget for a commercial historic building. It personally makes me very, very sad that this building that is currently owned by the Hudson Bay Company, previously was the Freeman Mall, they're objecting this designation. And I think it comes down to cost and perhaps a lack of societal priorities over heritage and sort of a respect for heritage. I'm not sure, I mean, we can't obviously just give more money automatically, but if there's any sort of way for myself or whoever to kind of push like more money, I don't know, to give to these buildings for renovations, because the traditional craftsmanship, the materials, all those things are costly. I don't believe that it would be more costly than demolishing it and reconstructing. Yeah, I think there's a bit of an imbalance there, a lack of support perhaps. But yes, I mean, a lot of these, Rideau Street will not be the same if this building is gone. Thank you for your responses.
Thank you so much for those comments, Member Legault, and just wanted to remind the committee, of course, this comes under the last item that we have under status update around inquiries and motions that based on some of the dialogue that we've heard here that's been presented to this committee in November of last year, I had moved a direction to staff to evaluate the current Heritage Grant Program and to ultimately report back to the Built Heritage Committee. So my understanding is that that will be imminent, that we will have that report about the adequacy around the amounts. But I do appreciate those comments, and we'll continue to listen to residents as well as committee members. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question is regarding Bradford Street. I just wanted clarification whether or not the designation would prevent the current or future owner from adding on to the house, altering it by making it a duplex or intensifying the number of units. Can you just, I think in some, with my aim here with this question is to perhaps reassure the owner that designation does not necessarily prevent a potential future owner from being interested in the potential of the property's future. So could you add to that?
Certainly. If this property is designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, any alterations to the exterior, including additions, would require a heritage permit. As we, the community sees monthly additions to heritage properties that go through the same process. We'll be looking at the standards and guidelines to make sure any alterations were sympathetic to the building.
But it doesn't prevent enlarging or adding on to.
That's correct. The building could be
in
enlarged.
a fundamental way. There is a process, but it's not it doesn't prevent that from happening.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see that Councillor Leeper has lowered his hand. So that being the case, I don't see any other questions to staff. It is my understanding, and I think that the report laid it out very clearly, that conditions of the property are not a consideration under Ontario Regulation 9/06. We've heard that from staff. We've heard that from delegates. We also understand that considerations around financial impacts are also not specific conditions that are considered under the Ontario Heritage Act. At this point, I don't see any other hands raised for questions to staff. So is this report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on June 25th for consideration. The next item is designation of 149, 152, 156 through 158, 198, and 217 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have a presentation from staff.
Good morning, Chair King, Vice Chair Plant, and Built Heritage Committee members. Today I'm presenting with Mackenzie Kim on Heritage staff's recommendation to designate a cluster of properties on Rideau Street with the addresses listed on the screen as individual designations under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The subject properties are all located on Rideau Street in Lowertown between Sussex Drive and Cumberland Street on the edge of the Byward Market. The properties share a connection to Rideau Street as a historic main street. Next slide, please. Rideau Street has functioned as a commercial main street in Ottawa since the 19th century. During the 19th century and throughout the 20th century, the west end of Rideau Street became a busy commercial corridor due to its proximity to transportation, services, the Byward Market, and Parliament Hill. Most of the buildings on Rideau Street were occupied by a variety of commercial tenants. The subject buildings house several typical Main Street businesses, such as a sporting goods store, a grocery store, a dance hall, a furniture store, and a tailor shop. As such, the properties have contextual value as they are important in supporting and maintaining the character of Rideau Street. Next slide, please. The subject properties historically functioned together as a commercial corridor in Lowertown. The buildings are visually linked together due to their similar stylings, featuring a 2 to 3 story massing, brick or stone cladding, flat roofs, and a ground level storefront with mixed use space above. Today, these buildings continue to support retail and commercial activity on one of Ottawa's historic main streets. Next slide, please. To begin with the individual properties, the building at 149 Rideau Street meets 4 of 9 criteria. The building was constructed circa 1875 and has design value as a representative example of a late 19th century Italianate commercial building on a main street in Ottawa. The Italianate style was popular from the 1830s until the 1920s in Canada and was frequently used in commercial buildings on main streets. The building at 149 Rideau Street features typical elements of the Italianate style. Some of the building's heritage attributes include its arched window openings and hood moldings, a large cornice, and decorative brick detailing. The building has design value because it displays a high degree of craftsmanship for a commercial building on Rideau Street. Next slide, please. The next building, 152 Rideau Street, also meets 4 of 9 criteria. Constructed circa 1898, 152 Rideau Street has design value as a good example of the Romanesque revival style in a commercial building. The style was popular in Canada from the 1940s to the early 1900s and was frequently used in civic, commercial, institutional, and religious buildings. The building at 152 Rideau Street features typical elements of the Romanesque revival style. Some of its heritage attributes, which include its heavy massing, decorative carved brick detailing, arched window openings, and carved stone lintels. The building displays a high degree of craftsmanship through its decorative carved foliage motifs and chiseled stonework. Next slide, please. The building at 156 to 158 Rideau Street meets 3 of 9 criteria. Constructed circa 1918, the building has design value as a representative example of an early 20th century commercial building with elements of the Art Deco style. Some of the heritage attributes which reflect this style include the building's arched parapets with decorative diamond detailing, diachromatic brick cladding, and geometric and linear decorative detailing. Next slide, please. The next building is 198 Rideau Street, which is located on the corner of Rideau and Waller Streets. This building meets 3 of 9 criteria. Constructed circa 1885, the building has physical value as a representative example of a late 19th century commercial building through its 3-story massing, flat roof, and brick cladding. The building's brick pilasters, rusticated stone lintels, and arched windows reflect influences of commercial Italianate architecture or Romanesque revival styles as seen in buildings 149 and 152 respectively. Next slide, please. The final building, 217 Rideau Street, meets 5 of 9 criteria. The building at 217 Rideau Street was originally constructed circa 1876 and underwent facade alterations in the early to mid 20th century to reflect the Beaux-Arts architectural style. The building at 217 Rideau Street has design value as a unique example of the Beaux-Arts architectural style used in a commercial building. The Beaux-Arts architectural style was popular in Canada during the first 2 decades of the 20th century and was typically used for civic buildings. The use of the style in a commercial building is unique. Some of the architectural features of this building, which are characteristic of the Beaux-Arts architectural style, include its classical detailing, such as its shallow pilasters with decorative capitals, ornate spandrel panels, and a roofline featuring a parapet and balustrade. The building features a high degree of craftsmanship through its elaborate use of stone and metal detailing. The building at 217 Rideau Street has historical value as it is directly associated with the George E. Preston and Sons tailor shop. The George E. Preston and Sons tailor shop was a well-known men's tailor and suit retail in Ottawa, established in 1870. It operated out of this building from 1884 until 1959. Throughout the business's long history, it was frequently patronized by prime ministers and other notable politicians. Next slide, please. Each of the properties on Rideau Street are recommended for individual designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as they all have connections to Rideau Street's history as an early main street in Ottawa, and they are all representative examples of early commercial buildings in Ottawa. Staff have reviewed the properties and determined that each property meets at least 3 of 9 criteria for designation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the in-depth report and for the excellent research that was undertaken to furnish the report. We did receive correspondence on this item from the Lower Town Community Association, from Heritage Ottawa, as well as Denton's. We have a number of registered speakers, and the first registered speaker is Skylar Sapaspina. So we will proceed.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm Skylar Sapaspina, the building's owner. Hi, Roberto Alberto, partner in municipal law at Denton's. So we're here.
Just one consideration is that the delegations are separate. So I don't know if you were planning on going back.
We just need 5 minutes, Mr. King. So, yeah.
Okay.
So we provided a correspondence dated June 10th, which I believe the committee's had an opportunity to review. And certainly we appreciate that the legislative amendments have created a little more urgency than everybody was probably hoping for on these items. And so we appreciate that. Part of the context for this site, and we're speaking specifically about 152 and 156 to 158, is that it's been on the city's registry, the Heritage Registry, since 2017 with no designation. And I know that that was a very broad registry, but I think it sort of speaks to the context. I mean, it's adjacent to the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District Plan and intentionally left out. If you look at the mapping of it, there's a carve out that really doesn't extend to that part of Rideau Street. So I want to make sure there's not a sort of a rash decision in a short period of time about that. The property is also in a state of disrepair, and appreciate that's not determinative well, but it is part of the context. The property is designated as a main street in the official plan, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. And I think even as the staff report was up and showed the site context, you could see the height that's gone up around it, which is fantastic for the city and demonstrating the density and intensification that the official plan is seeking and the PPS is seeking and all of those important policy goals. And so the concern is primarily that this designation not be inconsistent and not conform with those policy goals. Speaking to the criteria, the city concedes that 6 of the 9 criteria don't apply. In terms of, our letter kind of goes through the criteria, and I don't purport to reread that, but there's a lot of emphasis on the commercial use, and the commercial use is protected already in other policies, in the zoning, in the official plan. This is a cluster, described as a cluster of designations, and there's a mechanism in the Heritage Act for a cluster of designations, and it's a Heritage Conservation District Plan as opposed to a Part 4 registration. So I think it's the wrong instrument that's being used. But to go to the specific concerns that go to those policy points, part of the emphasis in staff's analysis is on the flat roof and the 2-story massing. And so that can have a major impact on development potential. We've seen many redevelopments in the city that do a great job protecting facades of buildings that add density to the city. And so there's elements of that. I appreciate that staff has reached out. There hasn't been a lot of time, and I don't, again, the legislation has created timelines that I don't think are ideal for anybody here. And certainly we're looking to engage more, but we're asking that the committee deny the recommendation for designation or alternatively defer. Another interesting point that was related to some of the earlier items is talking about the grant program and the deficiencies with the grant program, and that there's an evaluation of that, and that's coming back imminently. And again, the condition of this property is an issue as well. It's a commercial property. And so at a minimum, deferring this item till you have more information about that, I think would be wise. So subject to any questions, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and once again, I would just say, if you want to have a submission, we would do that separately. So you've opted for council to go first. That just makes things less complicated for the committee in terms of questions and for the record. Vice Chair Plante.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. So just curious, I just checked my inbox. I'm the counselor for the area. Have you reached out to my office about this?
No, I think we've had the notice for a couple of weeks. I was retained last week, so it's been not yet.
Okay, well, I appreciate you being here. I know you guys are very busy. So just personally, I would have appreciated you guys giving me a heads up. We could have talked with staff. We could have had a meeting about this. This is a bit, I support the heritage. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to support the heritage designation here. I'm on Rideau Street personally all the time. My son goes to Normal all the time. So I'm a bit concerned that you guys are coming to committee and you haven't reached out to me. I pride myself on being really available, especially for this very important issue. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Well, certainly there was no need for offense, and certainly want to work with staff and with council. As I said, it was a very short timeline. As you're getting the correspondence yesterday, that's not sort of my typical practice either. So, but thank you, that's noted.
And you also have a question from Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. I saw your letter and read it, and then I revisited the designation statements and research by the city. In general, I would still support what the city has researched and proposed as designation, acknowledging your concerns. This aspect of you raised some points, for example, the emphasis on the commercial use. That's part of good heritage sort of analysis of heritage building. If it gets to continue to be used in its original function, is the best way to preserve it. So it's not unusual for the city to emphasize that. This aspect of it being Art Deco is something I had to revisit myself. My first reaction is it was an Art Deco building. It's one of my favorite periods. But sort of looking further at the city's research and understanding it, this is sort of the initial start of the change from previous architecture to the Art Deco period, which ranges from 1910 to the end of the 1930s. And yeah, I think there's a comment in your letter that the building is being put in the same category as Supreme Court, which makes sense as is part of the Art Deco movement. And this sort of raises the importance of this as a prototype initial simple building, starting to transition from Art Deco to what became a very architectural decorative treatment often used for prominent buildings. And Supreme Court would be sort of the pinnacle of that in Canada towards the end of the 1930s, along with other buildings such as Postal Station B. So I think it's an important building to preserve and maintain, to give that comparison and dialogue between the high-level Art Deco buildings and these initial buildings where architects started to explore that architectural expression. Thank you for your concern, and we always have to listen to the people who are involved in these matters. But as I said, I think going back and double checking what the city had researched, I would still support the designation based on their analysis. Thank you.
I didn't hear a question, so okay. Thank you.
Member Legault.
Yes, I just want to clarify if I understood properly. So you believe that the north side of Rideau Street, where your properties exist, the cluster of properties, were not included as part of the Heritage Character District on purpose?
I presume the lines of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation were not an accident. Yeah, I believe they would have been on purpose. And if you look at it, that's not included. So
right. And do you believe that there's a unique heritage value to Rideau Street in itself? That layering of sort of history of that foreground, the two-story buildings, and then the tall towers and behind?
I think that, well, one, I think that's something that hasn't been analyzed by staff. And so that would be a different question and require analysis for that. I think that the layering of some of the height is very recent, right? So I think that's part of a good urban context. But I think that it doesn't all conflate to heritage. And I think that's my concern, is that a lot of planning principles it's all kind of being bundled into one, and that some of that might be inconsistent with some of the direction from the PPS or the official plan.
Okay. I think my understanding anyways is that this analysis is happening now. Rideau Street is being assessed now, and that actually the heritage value of these buildings on their own outside of the Heritage District actually have unique value in themselves. So they need to be respected, you know, for what they are individually. And that's why their entire volumetric massing is considered rather than just the facade. And it shouldn't be necessarily considered as much of a cluster or heritage character district, but for the uniqueness of each one of these storefronts. So
yeah, and the concern is just that the Part 4 designation is basically a blunter instrument. I think it's a bit more restrictive in terms of the ability.
Of course,
and so,
yeah.
So obviously the owner has a concern with that.
Yes, of course. And the Heritage Character District itself, which is north, you know, that Byward Market District, that does have its own unique character, of course, and that transitions through to Rideau Street. So I think a lot of the sort of fabric and the interest of that pedestrian scale would be lost without your buildings there. And it would be such a shame to see, you know, high towers, on either side, with already that south side being completely contemporary of Rideau Street. So thank you though. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your submission, your comments. I don't see any other hands. So now I want to extend the opportunity for Mr. Sepacina to provide a comment to the committee. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having us today. We can appreciate that the city has a job in preserving the heritage aspects of our buildings. So we had a deal signed with a developer about 10 years ago now. And it fell through due to question marks on the light rail that goes underneath the building. And the plan they had was to obviously intensify the corner. So we are worried about, future redevelopment of that corner. And I mean, just in terms of the money being available to rectify the countless issues with the facades, I mean, $10,000 to $20,000 doesn't even cover your scaffold, to throw onto the sidewalk to get to the bricks. And just my final point is, I know the city really cherishes the unique aspects of the heritage of Rideau Street. Rideau Street is nowhere near the same as it was when I was a kid. I mean, it's a total separate issue, but instead of working so hard to maintain the heritage aspects of the buildings, we should be looking at the social disorder on the streets. When I was a kid, my parents would let us out, 8, 9 years old, walk on the streets by ourselves. That can't happen these days. So, I mean, instead of focusing so much on the buildings, I think, we should also be trying to preserve what Rideau Street was like 20 years ago. And to me, that's a bigger issue than what we have in front of us today. Thank you.
We appreciate those comments, and Councillor Troster has some questions for you.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on your comment about social disorder. I mean, first of all, you are aware that we just opened a new police station in the Rideau Center, and there are millions and millions of dollars of resources going into Rideau Street. So, the city is working on it. I just have are you trying to conflate the social disorder with the desire not to designate? I'm just struggling with this because this is Heritage Committee. We consider heritage matters. Yeah. We consider other matters as a council or as a committee. They're related, but we have a very limited mandate as a committee, which is to preserve and designate buildings that have heritage status.
Sure. So where they kind of cross together, I think, is, as that area gets more intensified outside the Byward Market, I think that might be the answer to cleaning the streets up as well, right? Because a lot of the buildings on Rideau Street have been let go, much like the rest of the area. And I think, there's a lot of building owners out there that kind of say, if the city's not willing to put money into cleaning up the streets, why should we put money into our buildings, right? That's kind of the vibe I get from talking to some of the other neighboring building owners down there. So I think that one of the answers to cleaning that area up is a little bit more intensification around there. And you speak to the money that's going into cleaning up the area. I feel like the city's been trying, like these buildings have been in our family since the early 80s. I feel like the city's just been constantly trying to do something down there with little result, right?
Okay, so your family's owned the building since the 1980s, but you're also saying that they're in a state of disrepair and therefore should not get heritage status, but your family's owned it the whole time and are therefore responsible for the repairs, correct? So you're suggesting there was an unwillingness on your part to fix up the building because of the people who hang out near it? I'm just really struggling to understand the connection.
So last year, one of our tenants came out in the back door after doing some fit up on the inside, and there's somebody hanging from a garden hose off a fire escape. The area has been neglected by the city, so we have properties elsewhere as well. So we've been kind of neglecting those buildings the same way the city has. That's kind of how I look at it, right? So if the city doesn't want to put a lot of money down there, why should we?
So you've allowed them to fall into disrepair because you didn't feel that it was a priority for the city. And now you don't think it should be designated because it's fallen into disrepair?
So we've owned it for about 40 years. The building is about 120 years old.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And there's a question from Vice Chair Plant.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just wondering, they're all tenanted. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Do you have tenants in all of your, in all of your units?
Yeah, ground floor retail for the better part is full. Obviously, it's been a bit of a revolving door the last few years with COVID and stuff. Yeah, we have trouble after the first floor. So your second and third floors are usually vacant.
Okay, but the ground floors, because I don't think those are vacant at all. I'm just wondering the last time I was around there, they haven't been vacant for a while.
Yeah, we've had a good year down there, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your comments. I don't see any other hands raised, so thank you so much. The next registered speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. Thank you. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These 6 properties represent a significant example of surviving buildings on what was once Ottawa's historic main commercial street, a street that in recent years has been dominated by new high-rise residential developments. Rideau Street's history as a commercial main street consists of late 19th and early 20th century buildings, and these are some of the few surviving ones. Keeping these buildings, designating these properties enables Ottawa to do what dozens of communities across the country have done to preserve their traditional main streets. Encouraged by initiatives of the Main Street Program of the National Trust for Canada. In most of these instances, municipal and provincial governments and community support have resulted in a revival of these important neighborhoods as economic drivers for the social, retail, and tourist economy of the respective communities. We therefore support the staff recommendations for these properties and congratulate them on the well-researched and comprehensive cultural heritage evaluation reports and statements of cultural heritage value for each. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your submission. I don't see any hands raised, so thank you. The next item is questions to staff. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. Question for staff. With respect to the Heritage Grant Program, if the owner wants to do maintenance on a feature, which is maybe basic maintenance, but it's to the character defining element of the building, they can apply and get that grant money to help with the cost of that maintenance on the heritage feature. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, thanks for the question. Maintenance specifically, unfortunately, is not covered by the Heritage Grant Program, but restoration of those elements would be. So I think we could, work with an owner on a project, a phase project, perhaps, that would qualify for that program.
Thank you. I guess it's sometimes a gray area between what is maintenance and what is restoration. It's a fundamental start point is basic maintenance, and at some point it does move into restoration if you replace one brick, for example. So thank you for your explanation.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions from members, but I do have a few of my own. there was a comment, I guess, from the owner's council concerning the outline of characteristics, such as the massing and the roof. And I was just wondering if the outlining of those characteristics in the report preclude any adaptive reuse going forward on this building.
Thank you, Chair. I would say staff have thought quite critically about the list of attributes that have been included in the statement. I think there could be lots of solutions that could conserve those elements while also, lending themselves to a redevelopment, integrating those buildings into something taller, perhaps, a development site, a development project on that site, I think, could work quite well along with the designation. And I will say, I think one of the comments raised spoke to potentially a conflict between the PPS and the city's official plan. I would disagree. I think the PPS speaks to it really requires the conservation of significant built heritage resources, and the city's official plan very clearly speaks to balancing heritage conservation with the intensification goals of the city.
I appreciate that second comment. You beat me to the punch. So just to reiterate, you're saying that the owner's council's assertion that the item before us is inconsistent with the policy goals of both the official plan and the PPS is not accurate. It's not the case that staff is of that view.
That's correct.
Thank you so much for that. Member Legault.
Hi, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to respond to the comment about, demolishing these buildings and perhaps creating a higher density on Rideau Street. And given your background, your expertise, and your relationship with the planning department at the City of Ottawa, what sort of impact that would have on Rideau Street? Just, hypothetically speaking, let's say we go with a high density on Rideau and we get rid of the heritage buildings. What would be your response to that?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. I think, we're bringing forward these designations because I think staff feel that there is, there's cultural heritage value in these sites. We've done the evaluation and believe they meet the criteria under 0906. And I think, going back to the official plan, densification and intensification and heritage conservation, I think our team feels very strongly that those are not mutually exclusive goals. I think you can do both. And to your point before, I think if these buildings were demolished, that there would be a loss.
Right. But do you believe that intensification in this area would fix the problem with the social disorder? I just want to offer you an opportunity to respond to, wiping these historic buildings clean, and that would fix the social disorder.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not really sure that's something we can speak to in terms of the social disorder issues. Our colleagues in other parts of the city are obviously working on those things. I think we can speak to the aspects of sort of the heritage value of these buildings and how they contribute to the history of Rideau Street and how they could contribute to a vibrant Rideau Street in the future.
Thank you so much, Councillor Troster.
Thank you. I actually just have a few comments, and I want to thank staff for all your work on this report. Something that we see consistently in this committee, and we see in Centertown, and I know you can think of some infamous properties where this is the case, is we have property owners who are commercial property owners who allow heritage properties to go into disrepair. And then when we seek to designate them, they come to committee and say, it's in terrible shape, it should be torn down. This is demolition by neglect. It's unacceptable. And frankly, a lot of social disorder is attracted to areas that are derelict. It's attracted to areas that are not well maintained. Property owners also have a responsibility to maintain the properties. That is part of how we revive and maintain our downtown. And so I have sympathy for homeowners who may purchase a house and who are worried about their future investment. And I, my sympathy really lies there. But for commercial landlords that are saying, we're not bothering to maintain this property because we don't think the city cares about Rideau Street, well, that's not a good reason, to not designate a historically significant property. And we all know the story of Somerset House in my ward that sat empty for 17 years. That has been a huge problem. Finally is being redeveloped. But, there's a joint responsibility here between the city and between property owners to maintain properties. And I can think of another major property that's been, that has heritage value that's been emptied for more than a decade. And the owner has straight up told me he's just waiting for it to fall into disrepair so he can try to tear it down. And this is a problem. We see it all the time. And part of what we're doing this committee is trying to preserve the cultural heritage of our city and also to encourage that joint responsibility. And that's why the grant programs exist for designated properties, to be able to assist property owners who in good faith are trying to maintain their properties. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments, Councillor Troster. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. The delegation spoke to the concession that city staff had made that the building does not meet 6 out of the 9 criteria, that it meets 3. How does city staff approach the 2 of 9 criteria? Should we be more wary of designating buildings that don't meet 9 out of 9 criteria or 7 out of 9 criteria?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. I think staff have outlined the criteria that we feel these properties meet. The regulation requires that they meet only 2. These meet at least 3. Some of them meet more than that. And I think, when we're looking at doing our evaluation across the city, I think some of these are, many of the properties that meet 6, 7, 8, 9 of those criteria perhaps have already been designated. So these ones, I think, we're looking at some of the more modest examples. So I think that, meeting the requirements and going above those requirements, staff are comfortable recommending these designations.
Is 2 out of 9 a low bar? Is that easy to achieve? Like, how difficult is it to achieve 2 out of 9 of the criteria as required by the regulation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The legislation, as you know, requires 2 out of 9. It used to require 1 out of 9. So it's recently been amended to require 2. I would not say that these are easy criteria to meet. I think if you read them on face value, they appear to be very subjective and very open-ended. But I think if you think critically about it, and that's something that we, particularly in all of the work we've been doing in the last few months, have really focused in on is ensuring that we're not arguing that things meet criteria that they don't meet. So I think, you could make an argument. Someone could make a somewhat weaker argument, I would say, to say that these buildings meet 6 or 7. Like, you could find a way to weasel it, but I don't think it would be a reasonable argument that would stand up to scrutiny. And so we've really tried to be consistent in our evaluations of properties across the city. And I would say that you could make a very surface argument that things meet multiple criteria, but once you really dig into it and really think critically about it, those arguments would not hold up and could not be supported by primary research. And I think further to the previous comment about, how come this, things, if it doesn't mean 9 out of 9, should we be designating? Very few things meet. I actually can't think of anything that meets 9 out of 9. Because one of them is about engineering. So there are some that meet 8 out of 9, but I would say the vast majority are in the 3 to 5 range.
And does the landowner have some mechanism to appeal this decision should they disagree and we move ahead with designation?
Correct, that's correct. And through you, Chair. So should council proceed with not withdrawing the notice of intention. There would be an appeal process once the designation bylaw is passed. Sorry, I beg your pardon, notice of objection. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Quinn.
I would just, minor comments, not questions per se, so I will let my colleagues who have questions go ahead.
Thank you for that. Member Legault.
I also just have a comment.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Apologies if this was already covered, but are all the criteria weighted the same? Like criteria number 1, criteria number 4, are they equally as important under the Act as you review whether or not to put properties on the registry?
Thank you for the question through you, Chair. There's no weighting. They are all equal. There's no hierarchy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now comments, Member Legault.
Yes, I do have a comment about maintenance because this is something I often deal with. And sorry, I'm trying to pull up a quote from the standards and guidelines, but essentially buildings which are, typically new construction, for example, vinyl windows, which have, a 50-year warranty, or asphalt shingle roofs, which have this guaranteed warranty period that after their time period is done, it requires full replacement. That is, sort of where our society is going in terms of building construction. So there's no real, they're advertised as maintenance free, but essentially they're disposable. Whereas historic buildings require maintenance and they require care on a yearly basis, but that actually offers an infinite lifespan for these buildings if they are taken care of, because the materiality is readily available. It takes a level of craftsmanship, sure, and it takes a learning period as well for people to learn how to use the proper paint, how to work with the masonry, how to fix the windows. But once that skill is learned, those buildings have an infinite lifespan. So I'd just like to sort of reiterate that to the property owner, that this is not hopeless. There is perhaps a lack of craftsmanship, but that can be regained. And in terms of sustainability for our city, for our buildings, historic buildings offer that ability to be rejuvenated and repaired. You can't repair, you can't do a Dutchman on a vinyl window. So I would just encourage you to look into that, maybe allow it to pique your interest, and to perhaps maybe not go so far as to respect or adore or fall in love with your buildings, but just to see them for what they are and to see the possibilities that exist.
Thank you so much for those very informed comments. They're much appreciated. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Member Legault for making those important points about the value of historic buildings and the innate green nature of them, if you can maintain them and are willing to maintain them. My comment is also harkens back to one of the that I think was raised by Mr. Fleming. Just a reminder about the Main Street Canada program, which was hugely successful in the 1970s and 80s in this country, and it developed in response to the massive growth of suburbia at that time period and the massive growth of shopping malls, which in many traditional downtowns, the impact was the loss of retail, the loss of stores, the loss of shoppers. And many of those downtowns started to suffer and become derelict. And some of the negative social consequences that were raised, important ones that were raised today. began to take place. And one of the huge successes of the Main Street Canada program was that it focused on the built structures that existed on those main streets, the historic buildings that gave the streets quality, texture, and were worth investing in because they were helped make those streets unique. And there are Perth, Ontario was actually a pilot of that program. And if you go down Main Street, Perth, Ontario today, you can continue to see the successful results. Nelson, British Columbia is another one. If you've been out there, there are many right across the country. So it would be worth thinking in those terms about using the assets, although when they have been neglected, they stop looking like assets, but in a fundamental way, they are the best assets for Rideau Street, as ways to invest and rejuvenate and evolve and change and adapt, but they can be really core instruments in turning things around. So I agree with staff. These are not, it's not an if and or, they work together. And so I think our responsibility, as Councillor Trosser said, as this committee, is to speak to the cultural heritage of our city and how we can protect it and how we can encourage investing in it in order to rejuvenate and evolve areas in need of our attention. So those are my comments. I will needless to say, be supporting the designation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for those comments. I don't see any raised hands, so I just wanted to reiterate the sentiment that we've been hearing from committee members. That this Built Heritage Committee is tasked with protecting and investing in cultural heritage, our cultural heritage. It's important to note that we deal with a very prescribed piece of legislation. The designations, we deal with designations under Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And what we also heard in terms of this file is that the application or the designation that is before us is consistent with both city and provincial policy goals. It's important to note that the policy considerations that are undertaken by this city are multifaceted. In this committee, we deal with heritage. That does not mean, and that does not really mean that we preclude consideration around issues of social disorder. We have a lot of work that we undertake at Community Social Services Committee that deals with these types of issues. And not unlike what one of my colleagues had noted, there are investments. Are we, I think all of us, I hazard to speak for my council colleagues, but I would say it's accurate that we are all concerned with the state of social disorder in our downtown core, and that we are considering different investments, that the municipality is considering different investments. And so it's accurate, like my colleague, Councillor Troster had said, that we are making investments. There might not be at the speed at which we would want to see them made. We might not be seeing the speed of results, but the municipality has invested in a police station in the Rideau Centre. The municipality, in the last term of council, did move a realm plan around the Byward Market. The municipality, the city did establish a new market authority. So it's important to understand that when you come before this committee, we are dealing with heritage. It's not that we are not concerned with the elements around social disorder, but I do want to emphasize that that work is being undertaken by different departments and by different committees at the city. And there is a continuing work that will be undertaken there. So the approach is multifaceted, but here we deal with heritage. From my understanding, all the considerations before us are consistent with city and provincial policy goals. And so the next item is just to bring this forward for consideration. Is the report carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on June 25th for its consideration. The next item is Bill 23 implementation, heritage conservation districts, and we do have a presentation from staff. Oh, and I see Member Madigan, you've raised your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I have a conflict with another meeting, so I have to leave the rest of this meeting. Sorry about that. I'll rejoin in the next meeting. Thank you.
We appreciate the notification and thank you for joining us as always.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm here to present on Bill 23 implementation and heritage conservation district studies. So next slide, please. So just as a quick refresher, this report stems from direction established in our June 2023 implementation report, which was heard by BHC and endorsed by City Council in June of 2023. So that report directed staff to bring forward a work plan of heritage conservation district studies as part of our broader project of designating priority register listed properties in response to changes to the Ontario Heritage Act implemented through Bill 23. So as such, the purpose of this report is to present a number of recommendations related to heritage conservation district work to be completed by the Heritage Planning Branch. So before we look at the specific recommendations of this report, I'm just going to provide a bit of background and discuss some of the specifics of our approach. So next slide, please. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to quickly summarize what HCDs are and how they function. So heritage conservation districts, or HCDs, are a conservation tool enabled by Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. They're distinct from individual designations. The HCD provisions of the Act allow municipalities to designate entire areas, so neighborhoods, streets, or even entire municipalities as heritage conservation districts. They're designated by municipal bylaw, and that bylaw also adopts an HCD plan. The plan identifies key attributes and elements of that area, which give it its heritage value, and they establish policies and guidelines for how change is to occur in the area. So HCDs are a common conservation tool in Ottawa, and they're a key strategy for balancing some of the city's broader planning goals, like residential intensification, with heritage conservation. So in total, there are currently 21 heritage conservation districts designated in the city, clustered largely in the city's core urban wards, as you can see on the screen here. And next slide, please. So to actually designate an HCD, the city needs to demonstrate that a proposed area meets the criteria for designation, which are established under Regulation 906. So these criteria are similar to those used for the designation of individual properties, but the threshold for designation is different. So in order to designate an HCD, the city needs to demonstrate that at least 25% of all the properties within a proposed heritage conservation district meet 2 or more of the designation criteria. So just a little bit more specifically, this means not that 25% need to meet the same 2 across the entire area, but 25% of properties need to meet at least 2 or more of those 9 designation criteria. So to actually make this assessment, determine if an HCD is possible, and then inform the contents of a required HCD plan, city staff or a consultant generally undertake a formal heritage conservation district study according to the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act. And next slide, please. So this gets us to the 3 kind of main project types that are being discussed and recommended through this report. So heritage conservation district studies, heritage conservation district feasibility assessments, and then new HCD plans or updates for pre-2005 heritage conservation districts. And I'll talk about these individually. Next slide, please. So HCD studies, so this report recommends the completion of heritage conservation district studies for several different areas. HCD studies are sort of a large-scale, comprehensive study of an area under consideration for designation as an HCD. They're typically completed either in-house, so by often a dedicated staff member, or by a consultant hired by the city. HCD studies involve in-depth research and analysis into the specific area, with the goal of making a recommendation to council on whether or not to designate that area as an HCD. In terms of time and scale for completion, they're kind of similar to something like a secondary plan, taking often 1 to 2 years and involving significant public engagement and outreach. They follow the requirements established by Section 42 under the 40 sub 2 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and they ultimately assess if a sufficient number of properties meet the designation criteria established by the regulations. So the results of an HCD study then feed directly into the development of an HCD plan for the area. And next slide, please. So this other project type here, Heritage Conservation District feasibility assessments, is something that staff are proposing be pursued in a number of areas as well. And it's new and something that we've developed in-house. So as we've discussed, Heritage Conservation District studies are a fairly significant undertaking, but there's a lot of interest in doing more, both from community members, community associations, and also staff. With so much interest, we do need to ensure that our resources are being used efficiently and that we're being transparent on which areas have potential to actually become HCDs. From this idea, we get the HCD feasibility assessment. So it's essentially a high-level study that evaluates an area's potential to meet the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act for designation as an HCD. So the goals of the HCD feasibility assessment are as follows. So first, it's getting to an answer faster. So as noted, people are very interested in heritage conservation districts, and we frequently receive requests for them. Often these requests are acknowledged, but then sort of put on hold due to staff capacity, resource availability, et cetera. So the feasibility assessment, the idea here is really to allow us to give communities a more fulsome answer and be transparent on their request potential for actually moving forward as a heritage conservation district study. And the idea here is that we'll be able to do this at a faster rate than ever before. So the approach, the idea with it is to reduce risk with future HCD studies. We can be confident that a full study will actually result in a recommendation to designate a heritage conservation district and effectively make that work more efficient. The other goals, first, starting a dialogue. So there's always uncertainty for property owners when designation is contemplated in a new area. HCDs in particular, they face a lot of, I think, misinformation on their function and their intent. And the feasibility assessments will involve public outreach with wider engagement strategies developed on a case-by-case basis to start working with the community and understand their ideas, interests, and potential concerns for when it comes to potential designation. And then finally, the third goal of these assessments is really to scope that potential fulsome study. So the feasibility assessment will scope out the resource requirements of an HCD study, identify the resources that might already exist, so things like mapping or previously completed studies or inventories, and then also estimate a budget and other number of items that need to be completed in support of that full HCD study. So the idea for these assessments is that they'll be completed in-house by heritage staff, who will then report back to Built Heritage Committee for direction. And from there, if directed to do so, an HCD study will be added to staff's work plan. And we'll speak more about the specific areas recommended for this approach in the following slides. And next slide, please. And then finally, the third project type that's being recommended through this report are new plans or updates for pre-2005 HCDs. So prior to 2005, Heritage Conservation District plans weren't a requirement of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are some transition clauses within the Ontario Heritage Act that enable the city to adopt a new HCD plan for areas without repealing the existing district. And this is work that we've been completing over the past number of years. So notably the Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation District is an example of this, where a new plan was adopted for a previously designated HCD. So we're working on these at the moment, and this report also recommends that we continue to work on these in some specific areas. Okay, man, next slide, please. So now we'll jump into the specific recommendations. So recommendation 1 directs staff to complete HCD studies and plans for 3 areas in Centertown. So first, the Golden Triangle, the areas surrounding Dundonald Park, and Bank Street in Centertown. So Dundonald Park and the Golden Triangle are recommended to proceed directly to a HCD study. And HCD studies for these areas were previously directed through council in 2022. The Bank Street Heritage Conservation District is an existing pre-2005 Heritage Conservation District. It's already designated and will continue to be designated through this process. The recommendation only directs staff to complete and adopt a new HCD plan for this existing Heritage Conservation District. So the intent for this recommendation is for this work to be completed internally. These areas have been selected because we can leverage a lot of the existing work that's been recently completed and is up to date that was completed in relation to the Centertown Heritage Study and the previously mentioned updates to the Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation District, which abuts all of these identified areas. And I'll quickly just highlight these areas in the next few slides. So next slide, please. So this is the proposal for Dundonald Park and surrounding blocks. And with all of these are sort of considered drafts. So the study area boundary could continue to be refined and potentially expanded with consultation with the community. And next slide, please. And similarly for Golden Triangle, again, there is some potential for some flexibility in consultation with community. And next slide, please. And then finally, the Bank Street HCD. So the boundaries of this area will not be changing. This is an already designated Heritage Conservation District. We'll just be looking to actually adopt a plan as there is not a current plan for this HCD. And next slide, please. Okay, so recommendation 2. So this speaks to feasibility assessments. So this recommendation directs staff to complete 5 feasibility assessments and report back to Built Heritage Committee and Council on their findings. So as we've discussed, these are sort of the higher level assessments, which actually begin to kind of create an estimation of how and where the criteria for designation will actually be met, and also begin to scope out the larger study if required. So these were all identified either through community requests or through staff's review of the Heritage Register through the Bill 23 process. Some of these also relate to existing motions from council where things like HCD studies were directed to be completed. And I will now just go through these quickly. So if we go to the next slide. So the first one that we've identified as a feasibility assessment area is Beaverbrook. So this is coming from a previous council direction from 2015 to complete a Heritage Conservation District study. This is an example of a mid-century modern residential neighborhood. It's very large, and we're recommending that we move forward with the feasibility assessment for this area. And next slide, please. Similarly, McDonald Gardens Park, this stems from a request for the community for a Heritage Conservation District study, and we're recommending that we proceed with a feasibility assessment here. And next slide, please. Wellington Street West, so this is looking at sort of the commercial core of Hintonburg. This has been identified through the actual register review and some discussions with the community. And again, as noted on a lot of these, there is some potential to expand or consider the boundaries here in consultation with the community. And next slide, please. Island Park Drive, similarly, we received a fairly comprehensive request for a Heritage Conservation District study from the Community Association here, and we're proposing to proceed with the feasibility assessment for Island Park Drive. And next slide, please. And then finally, there is an ongoing collaborative study between Parks Canada, the NCC, and the City of Ottawa relating to the Rideau Canal and its cultural landscape. We do anticipate that there will be some recommendations about specific studies within this report. So once those recommendations are made available to us, we will be looking to potentially pursue Heritage Conservation District feasibility assessments for some of those areas identified by the report. And next slide, please. So recommendation 3, so this recommendation presents the actual work plan for future Heritage Conservation District work to be completed by the Heritage Planning Branch. There's no timelines associated with these projects, and each will be completed as resourcing and time permits. The aforementioned work directions, so the HCD studies and the feasibility assessments are sort of our initial priority, and this is the list of projects that'll be planned for completion following those. So next slide, please. So just to look kind of ahead to the future, so we're looking at some of the existing directions that we've already had. So things like Bank Street and the Glebe, a review of the Sandy Hill Cultural Heritage Character Area and the Sandy Hill West existing HCD. So that would be a plan update. And then as well, looking at Glebe and Powell Avenues in the Glebe and the existing HCD on Spark Street in downtown Ottawa. So as feasibility assessments are completed and new HCD studies may be directed through council and their review of those feasibility assessments that staff presents, the list will be updated and its prioritization will be updated as well. So for example, if we complete a feasibility assessment in a certain area, that will likely make a recommendation related to its priority within this list, and it may kind of bump ahead or bump down other items as fit. And just a note as well, so with this report, there are no recommendations related at the moment to future rural heritage conservation district studies or feasibility assessments, as we do believe that some broader consideration of rural heritage and more consultation with local communities needs to happen in advance of that. So we'll be working on that sort of, again, just trying to build a relationship, get an initial sense, and we'll be eventually reporting back on some of those results. And next slide, please. So recommendation 4, this is more of a technical recommendation, but this is just to receive updates related to some of the existing heritage conservation districts. So we're addressing a few older motions here. So some of these speak to pre-2005 heritage conservation districts, and then others speaking to the status and implementation of existing HCDs. So next slide, please. So just as an update on pre-2005 heritage conservation districts, there is ongoing work to establish new HCD plans to continue as per the recommendations of this report. New are currently in process. There's been a number of public engagement opportunities and a lot of work with the communities on those, and those are anticipated to go forward and to council Q3 of this year. And next slide, please. And then just some general updates on existing heritage conservation districts. So one thing that did come out of Bill 23 was the potential or the ability of the province to establish regulations to actually amend or update existing heritage conservation districts. So currently designated ones outside of that sort of pre-2005 context where a new HCD plan could be adopted. We have had previous directions to actually consider some updates and amendments to existing HCDs, both at the Russell Range HCD and then also in Rockcliffe Park, related to sort of a review of its implementation following its actual, its sort of official implementation in 2019 following the OLT decision there. The general sort of stance with these is that in absence of these regulations from the province, we don't have a formal process to actually update HCDs, with the exception of fully repealing an HCD and then attempting to redesignate it. So at the moment, we're not moving forward with any potential updates in absence of an actual process for that. But should those come out, that's a discussion that we can have in both of these contexts, so Russell Range and Rockcliffe Park. And next slide, please. And then just finally, recommendation 5 and 6. So this is, again, more of a technical recommendation, but it's just receiving for information new terms of reference for the completion of Heritage Conservation District studies and Heritage Conservation District feasibility assessments, both of which have been prepared alongside this report and are available for review as an attachment to the report. And next slide, please. And finally, just to recap, so again, we're seeking direction to pursue HCD studies and HCD feasibility assessments, along with receiving for information our kind of current work plan, which will be updated as these assessments are completed. They'll be completed following those new terms of references, and the prioritized work plan will be updated as this work is completed and reported back to BHC and council. And next slide. So that sums up everything. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Before we go to questions for staff, we do have a number of registered speakers, but we did receive correspondence from the Hintonburg Community Association, Heritage Ottawa, and Lower Town Community Association in terms of written correspondence, but we will start with the registered speakers first. And we have Hunter McGill on behalf of the Centertown Community Association.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, as you noted, on behalf of the Centertown Community Association. Come as no surprise to you and to the committee that we wholeheartedly support the creation of 2 new heritage conservation districts in Centertown, the one for the Golden Triangle, and in the area around Dundonald Park, which is sometimes referred to as Centertown West. The association feels very strongly that the HCDs are a valuable way and help to strike the right balance between heritage protection and new development. There's certainly recognition on the part of the association that greater density across all of Ottawa, including Centretown, is necessary. And we believe that the core of the city can evolve to achieve greater density and yet retain its heritage character. HCDs, while not a perfect instrument, are an important tool in working to achieve that balance. The new heritage districts, if approved by your committee and by council, will contribute to protection of beautiful heritage landscapes, streetscapes in the heart of the nation's capital, combined with new development and higher density. We want to recognize the work of the staff and the city's heritage branch. While it's perhaps not entirely appropriate to identify specific individuals, we feel that it's appropriate for us to note the city staff whom we have worked with closely to this point, Ms. Collins, Ms. McKim, and Ms. Kim, sorry, and Mr. McPherson. The CCA, as you can well imagine, works extensively with a wide range of city staff. We feel that our relationship, our working relationship with the Heritage Branch staff is right at the top of that list and can serve as a wonderful model of working relationships between the city and community organizations. That's not to say that we always agree. It's not just one great love-in beginning to end. We don't. On the other hand, our relationship is built on robust conversations and very helpful conversations which lead to increased knowledge and understanding on the part of our membership. We like to think that we are also, as a community organization, able to contribute to the city staff's the evolution of their thinking. Yes, these conversations have had a very significant impact on the understanding in the community and in the community association of the value of heritage conservation districts and a much better appreciation and support for these tools. In conclusion, we very strongly support this move by the city staff, and we look forward very much to the process of working further with city staff and responding to the opportunity to speak with you in due course about these three initiatives, although really strictly speaking, it's two initiatives, two new HCDs, and helping move them along to successful conclusion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, and you do have questions from Councillor Troster.
Hi, Hunter. Thanks for being here. First of all, I just want to say I so appreciate all of your work and the Centretown Community Association's work on this. I'll never forget a day a few months ago where I wandered out in my pajamas from my house to take out my compost to find an entire street full of CCA members who had little clipboards and notebooks and were doing this walking tour to take a look at potential new heritage districts in the neighborhood. It was great. And I was really surprised to find out that the Golden Triangle isn't designated as a heritage area. I know the area around Minto Park is. So this was a surprise for me. You've been a longtime advocate for heritage in Centretown. I'm wondering if you could just give us a really quick version of why you think the Golden Triangle and the area around Dundonald Park are special from a heritage perspective.
How long do I have? Thank you.
Summary.
Thank you. Well, I think that there's, notwithstanding the interesting demographic of both of those areas, which the residents of which contain a significant number of renters as opposed to owners, there is a genuine appreciation for the for the character that has been preserved, the homogeneity of the building styles, the building structures, what they represent, this consistency of built structures, what they represent in terms of a significant chunk of Ottawa's history and heritage. I know on the street that I live on, a number of buildings that have been preserved were homes to significant political figures in pre-1900, in late 19th century national history. And that is also true for, I'm in Centertown, but it is also true for areas in the Golden Triangle. Very interesting buildings where important figures, municipal and national history, lived. And these structures have been preserved, and there's a consistency of approach, a genuine appreciation on the part of the residents that this contributes to a wonderful character and a very enjoyable environment in which to live, to raise families, etc. And as I said, the HCDs are not a perfect tool, but they're a very important instrument to be able to preserve, to the extent possible, these features, which draw many of us to the area, and many of us have lived there for quite a long time, decades. I hope that's a useful answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. I loved during the election door knocking some of those old purpose-built apartment buildings in the Golden Triangle. Some of them still had dumbwaiters in them where food was brought up from the basement for MPs. So there's just really such incredible history. Those buildings have so much character. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this process unfold. And I just want to thank the community for pushing so hard for this, because it certainly exposed a gap for me. Like I just assumed Golden Triangle was a heritage district, and it's not. So I think finding a way, given that Centertown is one of the heaviest sites of intensification, finding a way to balance the need to preserve the really special character of the neighborhood with the need to build. I think heritage conservation districts help us get that balance right. So I'm pleased with this, and I can't wait to see it develop.
Thank you so much for your answers to those questions and for your comments. I don't see any other hands raised. So the next speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. Thank you for joining us, and you have 5 minutes.
Again, I'll be very brief. What I think is important about this is the feedback that you get from the communities, because the communities are the people who are going to benefit from these specifically. Heritage Ottawa is pleased to have had an opportunity to work with heritage planning staff and other community organizations in assisting with the development of the list of priorities for heritage conservation districts and plans and feasibility studies. This initiative reflects an important and much overdue effort in expanding Ottawa's conservation districts to better represent and preserve our built and social history. We look forward to supporting heritage planning staff in the implementation of these recommendations and thank them for this comprehensive and detailed approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those brief comments. We appreciate them. I don't see any other hands raised around the table, so thank you so much. And the last registered speaker on this item is Michelle Heyman from the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Before the various bills passed by the province of Ontario, which affect the heritage of our city, the RPRA had requested important amendments and clarifications to our HCD plan in order to increase its effectiveness. The Rockcliffe Park Residents Association has been disappointed in the past when told by city heritage staff that this was not possible given their workload and other priorities. It appears that the workload will continue to indefinitely prevent some important changes understandably so. There's a lot to be done. The RPRA appreciates the immense job that city heritage staff has and the great pressure they must feel in responding to the provincial changes. Like them, we await new regulations from the Ontario government designed to make amendments easier. While we are fortunate to have an HCD plan, we believe further work is needed to improve it. We believe it is important to register some important concerns. Regrettably, we do not share the staff report's general evaluation that our HCD plan has proven effective in terms of conserving the cultural landscape character of Rockcliffe Park. Development pressure in Rockcliffe Park is very strong compared to other HCDs in Ottawa. In the past, the number of annual development applications in Rockcliffe Park have been equal to or greater than all the other Ottawa HCDs combined. As such, the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation Bylaw is more frequently put to test, with the city often providing loose interpretation and enforcement of the plan. In short, we believe that the city has not taken adequate steps to ensure, for example, that new development is consistent with the height and mass of the grade 1 properties on the associated streetscape, that green landscape dominates properties, and that lighting remains subdued, all important to conserving the heritage of Rockcliffe Park, and as required by either our HCD plan or our secondary plan. As well, we believe that the city has not supported steps that would prevent those who partake of demolition by neglect or illegal demolition from profiting from these acts. In these cases, the city has recommended approval of considerably larger new homes and considerably reduced green landscape, thus providing an incentive for other owners to pursue demolition by neglect or illegal demolition at the cost of Rockcliffe Park's heritage character. We do not believe that heritage staff, the Built Heritage Committee, and in turn City Council sufficiently respond to our association's reviews of comments on the HCD plan, despite the fact that those who serve on our volunteer heritage committees have many years of experience and expertise and have lived in our community for many decades. The staff report notes that last month, May 28th, Rockcliffe Park was designated as a National Historic District by Parks Canada. In fact, it was designated a National Historic Site, not by a small unit within the very large federal bureaucracy, Parks Canada, but by the Government of Canada on the advice of the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada. This is a rare and singular honor for a district in Canada, and we hope it will be celebrated by the City of Ottawa. It is only the 4th such designation within Ontario and the 34th in the country as a whole. Given this confirmation by the federal government of the importance of Rockcliffe Park to the history and heritage of Canada, we hold out hope that the heritage of our community will be better and more consistently protected by the city. Of great importance to us and to other heritage conservation districts in Ottawa is that the complex zoning bylaw review currently underway will clearly state and steadfastly ensure that heritage conservation districts will be fully protected from the drive from intensification and any other aspects that would threaten or compromise the integrity, heritage attributes, and unique character of these districts. We ask that resident heritage committees and Heritage Ottawa be included as important partners with heritage staff to provide a prominent voice in helping to generate a new zoning bylaw, which works jointly with HCD plans to create bylaws which strongly protect and reflect the importance of heritage conservation in our neighborhoods and the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. I'm looking forward to working with the Residents Association on all of these items. I know that in the capacity as your local ward councillor, we're always endeavoring to ensure that we work towards greater consensus and building better lines of communication around the differing interpretations of the policies and guidelines around the Heritage Conservation District Plan. So I know we'll continue to do that, and I look forward to working with not just the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association, but all community associations in my ward around the comprehensive zoning bylaw. And I know that all members of council around this table and around the greater Horseshoe will be undertaking that. So I really appreciate your comments, and some of your comments will translate into some questions for staff that I will have. Thank you for so much for joining us. And oh, I do see that Vice Chair Plant has a question for you.
Hi, thank you so much. I have 3 heritage committees that do my community associations, and I know they do a ton of work. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I know it's all volunteer. I was just wondering, and maybe it wasn't clear to me, you're the position of the heritage committee that the R1 designation stay in Rockcliffe Park? Is that what I'm understanding?
I've looked at the new zoning bylaw, and I'm not aware, it's not very easy yet to distinguish, like, for example, we're designated as N2F. And I'm not sure, and that has less restrictions, for example, than N1 does. So it's a little puzzling to me as to why heritage districts wouldn't automatically receive an N1 status.
Right.
But again, this is all new to me, and I'm trying to work my way through it and understand the consequences of it. In a dream world, I would love to see a special zoning bylaw. I mean, the lawyers will have a field day with this, but I would love to have a heritage zoning bylaw that connects the zoning bylaw with the heritage bylaw. So,
yeah,
or language that at least refers the zoning bylaw to go look at the heritage plans. I think often times when individuals go and buy a property in a heritage district, even though they're supposed to have been advised by the real estate agents, they're not always aware of what that entails. And I think it's particularly helpful if they'll go to the zoning bylaw, because that's a logical place to look. But if there was a direct reference in the zoning bylaw, for example, towards the heritage conservation district plans, not anybody in specific, but just say, please refer to, which heritage plans which may be more restrictive or have greater specifications for.
Yeah, and I'm also happy if you want to put you in touch with my heritage committees. I think you banding together would be.
Yes, I completely agree, because this is something that's going to affect all the wards across the city. How does it translate into the new zoning bylaw? And I think it provides greater clarity for staff and for us as community associations. They would love it if we never showed up. We would love it if we never showed up. So it would be wonderful to have the fantastic direction so that it is clear to everybody what direction development and intensification should take.
Great. And thanks again for all your work.
Thank you.
We appreciate your comments. Seeing no other questions, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Questions to staff? Councillor Troster.
Hi, I just wanted to thank staff so much for working so collaboratively with the Centertown Community Association. I don't want to preempt the study's conclusion, but I'm just wondering if you could speak to why you think that these 2 areas merit a full heritage designation or heritage conservation district rather than just designation for individual buildings. Like, what's the advantage?
Yeah, through the chair, I think that's a great question. I think first of all, these do stem from some recent directions related that came out of the work that was done to adopt a new plan for Centertown. So I think that's kind of where the initial push to do these in the more immediate future comes from. But in terms of their actual kind of ability to meet the criteria, I think these are both particularly dense concentrations of several, I think, specific architectural styles. And there's certainly a number of kind of common associative themes that go through both of these areas and tell sort of a unique story about the development of central Ottawa. So I think they're both strong candidates from that perspective.
That's great. And I really appreciate that this is going to be like a very collaborative, iterative process. And I think this comes at a really good time when we're also discussing our zoning bylaw. So we can talk about how we preserve the character of the neighborhood while we grow. And there are also lots of great examples in Centertown of heritage, buildings with designation that have incorporated facades, but still able to intensify. So I look forward to this process. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for those questions and comments. Councillor Lieber.
Thanks. I'll be baldly pandering for a moment and just ask staff with Jen Gillespie with the Island Park Community Association in the gallery, whether the extensive work that the Island Park Community Association did in collaboration with a real local expert, Dave Alston, was helpful in helping the staff determine to move ahead with the feasibility study of the Island Park HCD.
Yes, through the chair, extremely helpful, and we're very gracious for the work that the Island Park Community Association and also all the other community associations across the city have put together. It's immensely helpful, and we look forward to further collaboration.
Fantastic. Great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I want to echo those sentiments around the work that was undertaken around. So it's a complex document, a very comprehensive plan that's before us, and we're appreciative of the work that staff has undertaken on it. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to second those comments that it's a very impressive body of work. Thank you very much. This is just a general comment about people who might be interested in a couple of the, for a little more information on a couple of the proposed future HCDs. I noticed that Heritage Ottawa has 2 walking tours as part of their walking tour season this year. One is of Island Park Drive, and the other is presented by the Beaverbrook Community Association of Beaverbrook. So if you were interested in more information about these 2 areas that are coming down the pipe, take a look at you have to register and et cetera, but it's great, and it's great to see that organization, helping raise awareness and educate people about the potential of these important areas to our city. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for raising awareness to the general public and the attendees of the committee. It's much appreciated. Vice Chair Plante.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the the Island Park Drive, because I know it leads to a bridge that goes to Quebec. And so part of my discussions around the perpetual issues around King Edward was opening the other bridges in the city to allow for truck traffic to alleviate some of the congestion in our area. Would that, if it does get a heritage designation, would that prevent the truck traffic from being allowed in this area, or do you not know?
I would say that's not something that we could, one, it's not something that would be regulated under the Heritage Act in terms of the type of traffic that uses the road. So I don't think it would make any difference.
Could it be leveraged to prevent a more equitable distribution of truck traffic?
Well, Vice Chair Plante, I don't think that that's really germane to the heritage considerations here.
Okay.
I think that that's something you might want to raise with Transportation Committee. We'll be looking at different iterations of the Transportation Master Plan, and that's probably where it would be more germane to have those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
And before I go to questions, I did see that Councillor Curry had joined us. I saw that she had raised her hand. I just wanted to make sure that her hand didn't fall by mistake. Excellent. Councillor Carey.
Thank you. And this is the very first time I've ever been at this committee, Chair King. It's very exciting, let me tell you. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy that you joined us.
Yes, I was just going to ask a few questions of staff. Is this the right time to do that?
It is, absolutely. Please go ahead.
So just first of all, I did want to say thank you very much to staff for meeting with the Beaverbrook Community Association president over many years. That has been tremendously helpful. And you know from the introduction here that this was actually a motion directing that Beaverbrook be looked at as a heritage conservation district right away. But the feasibility study, I think, is the smarter way to go. But I was just going to ask a question about the map, because the community was wondering, all of Beaverbrook isn't included in the map, and I just wanted to get the official answer as to why it wasn't fully included. And I know the answer to this. I just want it stated for why it wasn't, because people are asking.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair. So the map is based on the original subdivision plan for Beaverbrook from when it was first planned and constructed. However, as we've discussed with all of these areas, if there are, areas that the community is interested in potentially including, that is a discussion we can have.
Thank you for that. And then the second thing I was just going to ask about was when you get further into these discussions, would things such as the lighting be looked at? Because this is a constant concern that the way that everyone understands, I think on this committee, that all of the wires and lines were buried many years ago to make sure there was nothing overhead for storms. So it was very well planned. But part of that included the lighting in front of everyone's houses, and the street lights are lit themselves. They're square boxes with the name of the street lit up. It's quite lovely. But they age, and the community has raised money to continue to keep them. But would that also be something that would be looked at?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I think that the unique sort of lighting character of the street lights and the street signs in Beaverbrook are a pretty interesting part of its design. So I could see that being something we would be looking to conserve as part of any future HCD if one was considered.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this. The fact that this will make it potentially quicker is a very important part of it, because the area has been waiting for a really long time. But thank you so much, Chair King, for not missing me. I was madly finishing an email to somebody that's desperately needing an answer, so I almost missed my opportunity. So thank you so much.
Well, you stayed with us for so long that I know that you'd be really disappointed if you didn't have that opportunity to ask the question. And frankly, you might be more disappointed with me. So I wanted to make sure that your questions were addressed. So thank you so much for joining us. And with this on the agenda, we hope to see you more and more at the committee.
For sure. Thanks a lot.
So I do have a question, I think, that emerged from some of the discussions from Rockcliffe Park Residents Association. And I know that given the fact that there is no amendment process for Heritage Conservation District plans, the only option available is to amend the plan. To amend the plan would ultimately be to repeal it. So that's my understanding, and to repeal the existing bylaws and pass a new bylaw with a new HCD plan, since the province doesn't give us tools to amend. I was just wondering if you could describe the risks that would be associated with that type of process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the primary risk that would be associated with that approach would be that the new designation bylaw and HCD plan would be subject to appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So whereas right now the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District, the actual status of it as a heritage district isn't in question. If it was repealed and a new designation was pursued, it would be subject, one, to all the similar public processes and sort of discussion and debate at Built Heritage Committee, and then also, again, to the ultimate appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
So, notwithstanding those changes and the fact that we really can't make them, we can't make those amendments, and that we are waiting, in a sense, for changes from the province to have an amending formula, in a sense, to deal with things. In the interim, is staff working with the Residents Association, specifically in Rockcliffe Park, around the differing interpretations that they might have? Because to my knowledge and understanding, there is ongoing dialogue on different applications that come forward. So I'm just curious as to the stance of staff, noting that we cannot amend specific items that might be in question by the community. I'm just curious whether the staff still does due diligence and works with the community to seek accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff follow the normal process that we do with all communities, with the Residents Association in Rockcliffe Park. When we receive an application or a request for a pre-application consultation, community members are invited to participate in that process through our pre-consultation program. I think one of the challenges, and we said this right in the report, that there are sometimes differing interpretations of policy between the city and the community. We work very hard to try to resolve concerns, but we are not always able to get on the same page. And I don't think there may be instances where that's not possible. So those differing interpretations, staff have a professional duty to City Council and this committee to provide our best professional recommendations as professional planners, and then again support those recommendations at the Ontario Land Tribunal as needed. So we may not always be able to agree with the position of the Residents Association, but we do try to get as close as we can.
I appreciate that effort, and my office sees that effort in play, that there's continuous discussion and dialogue. And I'm sorry that the representative from Rockcliffe Park Residents Association had to leave, because I also wanted to really shine a light and congratulate the association for working with city staff as well as council to work towards the recent designation of Rockcliffe Park as a National Historic District by the Government of Canada. I know that there was work that was done with staff, there was work that was done with my office, there's work that was done with the committee, and there's work that was done with council. And I think that's a great achievement, notwithstanding their concerns around the preservation of heritage, which they outlined. I think it's amazing when you have over 440 acres, over 900 homes that have been recognized by the federal government as a National Historic District, 1 out of 33, that there's an achievement, and there has been some good work that has been done both by the community as well as the city. So I wanted to thank the association. It will go down at least on record. And I also wanted to thank staff for that work as well. Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on June 25th for consideration. The last substantive item is the status update, Built Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ended May 24th, 2024. A pro forma item, but an item that I did point to that noted that there is going to be some investigation by staff on the Heritage Grant Program that's actually integrated into that item. I don't see any questions, and there are no registered speakers. Is this report received? Received. Thank you so much. There are no in-camera items. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, are there any inquiries? Seeing none, is there any other business? I don't see anybody with their hands raised. On adjournment. We are adjourned. The next meeting is July 9th, 2024. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.